Hi everyone, thanks for stopping by. I'm Paulinski Master of Wine. Today's video is going to be covering an area that gets a lot of attention on YouTube. But within this area, there's also a type of wine that doesn't get a whole lot of play, and that's going to be the primary focus here. What I'm going to be discussing are the wines from the southern Rhone, specifically Cotes du Rhone Blanc. We're not going to be talking about Condrieu or Hermitage Blanc. We're going to focus on Cotes du Rhone Blanc at the most basic level. In recent years, these wines have gone through a tremendous amount of change. The value for the money has very much improved. I'm going to talk a little bit about the style, the grape varieties. We're also going to talk a bit about some wine and food pairing. And at the end of the video, I'm going to do a tasting of an example that is spot on typical of modern day Cotes du Rhone Blanc. The Rhone Valley produces about 400 million bottles of wine per year. Only Bordeaux produces more wine in France. Within the Rhone Valley, about 95% of the production, or 380 million bottles, comes from the southern Rhone. A significant segment of the Rhone Valley production is labeled as Cotes du Rhone. This is really the base level, or that everyday type table wine. Some of these can be just amazing values. Around 80% of what is labeled Cotes du Rhone is red. That number has really been the base for the region for a long period of time, and this is what gets a lot of coverage in many of the YouTube videos. Rosé accounts for around 15% of the production of Cotes du Rhone. That number has increased significantly in recent years as demand for rosé has increased as well. Now, Cotes du Rhone Blanc, and this is what I'm going to focus on in this video, only accounts for around 6% of the total range of wines labeled as such. InterRhone, which is the primary governing body in that part of the world, has announced that by the end of this decade, they would like to double the production of white wine. And a lot of that is just driven by global consumption habits. Generally speaking, warm growing regions, and this is certainly the case for the southern Rhone, which is a very Mediterranean climate, oftentimes the white wines will have elevated levels of alcohol and low acidity. The wines can sometimes come across as flat, dull, lifeless. This is something that is very common with Cotes du Rhone Blanc for a number of years. In recent years, there have been some changes in the way that these wines are produced, and now they're fresher, they're brighter, they have more of a zesty, tingly acidity. Some of this has been achieved through blending with different grape varieties, also harvesting early when the sugar levels are a bit lower, the acidity is quite higher, and also there's been some improvement in cellar techniques that help to retain the freshness and brightness of the wines. The wine growers in the Rhone have an advantage that many other places in the world just don't have, and that is there's a broad range of grape varieties. Within the Rhone Valley, there's more than 24 grape varieties that are approved. There's about a dozen that are used for white wine production. Now, up in the northern Rhone, in places like Condrieu, for instance, the wines there will be a single grape variety, in that case, Viognier. But down in the southern part of the Rhone, it's often a blend of different grape varieties. And the winemakers have a broad palette to choose from, creating wines that have complexity and length and just more interest than any of the single grape varieties have. So in that regard, there's a lot of creativity that can take place. And oftentimes the end results are wines that are just tremendous for the money. If you'd like to learn a bit more about the various white grape varieties grown in the Rhone Valley, things like Grenache Blanc, Viognier, Marsanne, Roussanne, Claret, Bourboulenc, check the description down below. There I'll have some of the details of what each grape variety contributes. And it'll give you some idea how these different grape varieties can be blended to put together wines that bring a lot of interest and character. In terms of recent vintages for Cotes du Rhone Blanc, the 2021 is in the market in a big way at the present time, and I absolutely love these wines. It's a much maligned vintage. It's a year that had all sorts of weather challenges, but I think the quality of the 2021s for Cotes du Rhone Blanc is excellent. The alcohol is not overly high. It's around that 13% mark. The acidity generally is very good. The wines have this freshness, the liveliness to them. If you're looking for something that has more weight, more richness, a little lower acidity, that would be the 2020 vintage. That was much more of a drought year. The alcohol tends to be a bit higher, oftentimes pushing that 14 range, and also the acidity tends to be a bit lower as well. Within the Rhone, there's a tremendous amount of wine producers, more than 5,000 individual wine properties. The one I'm going to be tasting here is broadly sold within Total Wine and More in the US. It's a property that also exports to a few other markets as well. If you cannot find this particular wine, no worries whatsoever. Just look for a domain bottled Cotes du Rhone, and that'll be clearly indicated on the label. Within the Rhone, there's also a good number of cooperatives, and some of these cooperatives make very good wine as well. My feeling is, in most cases, you're going to be best assured of quality when you go with the domain bottling. And essentially what this means is the grape grower is also the wine producer. So they're actually taking control of everything from start to finish. I'll be tasting a 2021 Domaine Guy Mousset Cotes du Rhone Blanc. This is made from 80% Grenache Blanc and 20% Claret. Okay, so let's give this wine a go. As I mentioned, this is primarily made from Grenache Blanc, very typical of Cotes du Rhone Blanc, having Grenache Blanc as its base. You'll see the color here is rather pale. There's a bit of a yellowy tinge to it, but very much in line with a youthful wine. Now, Grenache Blanc is either the number 5 or 6 most widely planted grape variety in France. Who knew? You never, or almost never, see a wine labeled as Grenache Blanc. Typically, it's going to be part of a blend with other grape varieties, as is the case here. In terms of the aromatics, it's bright, it has that freshness, there's all primary fruit. It smells a little bit like Bosc pear. There's also a bit of a peachy apricot note to it. There's no hint of oak whatsoever. If this wine did spend some time in oak, I think maybe it's kissed a toothpick at the very most. There's no alcoholic heat. It has that alcohol level at 13%. The wine can support it just fine. On the palate, it has that brightness, that freshness to it, good acidity. Now keep in mind that both Grenache Blanc and Claret, the two grape varieties used to make this wine, oftentimes these are grape varieties that have relatively low acidity. But when the vineyard treatment is such where harvest is a bit earlier, you retain the acidity, and there's also steps taken during the winemaking process to retain the freshness and brightness. This is the type of wine you see as an end result. Absolutely love this wine. I think it's interesting if you fans of Chardonnay, fans of Sauvignon Blanc, you're looking for something a little bit different. This is definitely worth searching out, and you can't contest with the value. The value statement is outstanding. And I paired it with a whole roasted seasoned fish made with bolachan, a Malaysian seasoning made from dried, roasted, fermented shrimp. Fantastic addition to this dish. Recent weeks, I've done a good number of videos on some alternative grape varieties and some wines that are a little bit off the beaten path. I think maybe Cotes du Rhone Blanc can fit that bill as well. If they can hit their targets over the next several years, maybe this is going to be much more commonplace. But if you have interest in some grape varieties that are a bit off the beaten path, take a look at the end screen on this video. I'll have links to a couple of those videos. Please comment down below. As always, your feedback is much appreciated. You know what I'm going to be drinking tonight. I hope you're drinking something really good as well. And until next time, cheers.